thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the various components of the Azure Synapse Dataverse Link. Dataverse obviously is a low-code data platform within the Microsoft Power Platform designed for building and managing business applications. For my purposes today, Dataverse is the native storage location for the Dynamics 365 for Sales and 365 customer service, amongst other Dynamics 365 for Sales applications. Azure Data Lake, as you see, is a cloud-based data lake solution. It's engineered to store data in any format and to facilitate analytical workloads. So we will be using the Azure Data Lake in our environment today to store the data that is going to be extracted from both Dynamics 365 CE and Dynamics Finance and Operations. We will then talk about Synapse, which is a cloud-based analytics service that enables data processing and collaborative analytics. So Synapse is where we're going to make the data in Azure Data Lake easier to access, easier to transform, easier to collaborate in, and it's going to make the actual data in Azure Data Lake easier to work with. And finally, we'll talk about the Synapse Dataverse Link itself, which is kind of the bridge between Dataverse and the Synapse platform. The Synapse Dataverse Link is going to allow us to pull data from the Dataverse and other Microsoft and non-Microsoft applications into Azure Data Lake. The key features of the Synapse Dataverse Link: the ability to analyze data in Dataverse in near real time as it is created or updated, without the need for replication or synchronization. So basically, it creates a bridge between the Dataverse and Azure Data Lake, and it allows us to pull data as it's being changed in Finance and Operations and CE into Azure Data Lake. In this case, we don't have to build manual pipelines. We don't have to build our own custom applications. We can use the Azure Synapse Dataverse Link to pull the data natively from those two applications. Simplified data access. So as I mentioned, it eliminates the need for complex data pipelines or transformations. By using the Synapse Analytics, it allows us to have a unified analytics environment. It also allows us to pull data from multiple sources and have a comprehensive analytics and reporting set across an organization's data landscape. There's performance optimization in using the Azure Data Synapse Link. There's built-in optimizations in Synapse for querying and analyzing Dataverse data. You will get better performance and scalability for analytical workloads. You will be offloading the resources you are utilizing from the transactional database in CE and F&O to the Synapse resources, which will allow you to scale. There's a lower cost of data storage, so you can store historical data in Azure Data Lake. So if you have a large data set, you can use the Synapse Dataverse tool to take data from your transactional database into Azure Data Lake, and then as you're reporting off of that, you can also purge data in the transactional database to lower costs. And then finally, as I mentioned, scalability. As your data volumes grow, and as your data volumes grow and your processing needs grow, the Azure Synapse Link and the Synapse Analytics environment itself can grow with you. So it's kind of allowing you to future-proof your environment as you build out your data architecture. Some of the scenarios that we could use Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse along with Azure Synapse Analytics. Obviously, on the CE side of things, it can be used for sales forecasting, analyzing historical data from 365, along with data that we've pulled into Azure Data Lake from other external market sources to look at trends and to forecast future potential performance. In line with that, we can also use it to look at customer segmentation, pulling demographic data both from CE and from other sources into a standard data lake environment that we can then use to extract data using Synapse. On the CE side, it can be used for supply chain automation and financial reporting and analytics. Supply chain automation obviously allows you to consolidate and analyze data related to inventory, demand planning, supplier performance, which could be data in F&O or external to F&O, and then logistic organization information that you would potentially be able to acquire and bring into the data lake itself. Financial reporting and analytics is more similar to the standard reporting out of an ERP system, but it allows you to perform advanced financial analysis, forecasting, and budgeting. So you can make data-driven decisions to better optimize the financial reporting and processes. So this diagram is basically an overall representation of the components of the Azure Synapse Link for Database. On the left side, we see our data producers, which is going to create or generate the data. As you can see, that can be a Dynamics app itself, like CE or F&O. It can be other modern business apps that can use Dataverse as a storage facility, or it could be external data that we use to bring into Azure Data Lake. The Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse obviously is going to extract the data from the application. It continuously exports data and metadata. So as you make changes and your tables in your environment are set for change tracking, it will track your inserts, updates, and deletes, and it will bring that data out into Azure Data Lake. If you make changes to your application, so if you add columns, if you remove columns, that type of thing, that metadata will also go out with the Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse. You could potentially pull data directly from the Azure Data Lake, but Azure Synapse Analytics provides it optimizes the experience. It makes the experience much easier, much more efficient to get to the data, and it allows you to use standard SQL queries and some other native tools like Apache Spark and potentially other Synapse pipelines to transform the data. So again, the Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse is the bridge between your data producers, which is your CE and F&O, and your data consumers. Christopher is going to show you an example of using Power BI to consume the data from Azure Synapse Analytics, but we could obviously also use Azure Databricks or Data Factory to consume and work with that data. Now, in my demonstration, I'm going to show you how to set it up, and it's going to be a relatively quick demonstration, but there's a number of prerequisites required to be able to configure the Azure Synapse Dataverse link. So you must currently have an Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account. In that account, you must have owner and storage blob container contributor roles, and you must enable hierarchical namespace both for the initial extract of data and for the ongoing extract of data. The Synapse workspace will already need to be set up prior to configuring it. You have to be a Synapse administrator, and there are some location restrictions. You must provision the Synapse workspace in the same region as your Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account, and you must provision the Synapse workspace in the same resource group as your Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account, and we generally will create a new resource group for this type of work. Finally, on the Dataverse side, there are some requirements also. Your Azure Data Lake Storage Gen 2 account and workspace must be created in the same Microsoft Entra tenant as your Power Apps tenant. And the Azure Data Lake Gen 2 and Synapse workspace must be created in the same Entra region as your Power Apps environment. And you must have the Dataverse system administrator role in Dataverse to be able to configure this. So let's go into a demonstration now. So I'm going to pull over my Power Apps environment, and we'll see here this is the standard Power Apps Make Power Apps environment. Initially, you will not see your Azure Synapse Link here on the left side. You'll see your standard tables and flows and solutions, and have your standard desktop. To add this to your portal, you will need to click on More and click on Discover All, and then that will bring you into a selection where you can search on Azure Synapse Link and add that to your tree. If we go into Azure Synapse Link now, you'll see that I currently already have Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse set up. If I was to create a new link, if we want to talk about configuring a new one, I would click on the new link up here. And in here will provide us, it's a real quick and easy interface. Really, you just need to assign a subscription. You need to assign a resource group. Again, we talked about using a unique resource group for this type of work. And then you need to choose a storage account. And again, all the requirements that I talked about in the past, the prerequisites, are going to be enforced here, where you need to have your resource group and storage account in the same region. All of your authentication has to be done within the same Entra organization. And then we would select next. This is going to show me my list of tables for my environment, and we'll select the tables and choose save, and then that will actually go out and build all of the interface for the environment itself. Okay, for our purposes today, we're going to talk about an already existing link set up in Azure Synapse Link for Dataverse. So I'm going to open this already configured one, and we'll first initially see the tables that have already been set up to be synchronized between Dynamics 365 CE and Azure Data Lake. At this point, we've got our accounts, we've got our account leads, our case, our contact leads, and so on. So these are already have been set up. It'll show when it was the last time it was synchronized. It will talk about append only. Append only is basically defined as if you don't have a created on date field in your CE table or object, you will need to choose the append only option. If you have a created on, then you'll be able to use the standard functionality, which is going to be the in-place update or upsert versus a append only. If we want to add additional tables to this environment, we would choose to manage tables here, which is then going to show us our the tables that we currently do have checked, along with any other table that we have in Dynamics 365 CE that has change tracking enabled on it. To see whether you have change tracking enabled on an environment, you would go into your tables and pull up the table in question. Let's say we wanted to look at appointment here. Under appointment and properties, you'll see your edit table options. We go into advanced options, and we make sure that track changes is marked, which it is for this particular table. Okay, after confirming that your change tracking is set, we can go back to Azure Synapse Link, and we can add that table to the interface. So if we open up the environment and choose to manage tables, we can then find the appointment table and select it and choose save. You will then see that will queue that. So the sync status will go from queued to in progress to completed to active. Active being that it's actively monitoring the change tracking events in CE and on a time basis, bringing that into Azure Data Lake on a near real-time basis. If we want to look at the data lake itself, we can go to Azure Data Lake directly from here, which will bring us into the hierarchical structure that I talked about earlier. So it created this when I initially set up the Azure Synapse Link, and you'll see in here we've got a folder for every one of those tables that I selected. So we've got account leads, appointment, contact leads, and so on. We also have a model JSON, which is basically just the definition of the tables. It's going to tell you what the table itself, what fields are in the table, what the data type is for that particular table, and so on. We can also go to the Azure Synapse Analytics workspace. And in the workspace, we can look and actually do standard queries against the data, either in the Azure Synapse Analytics Studio itself, or I'm going to also show you how you can do it in SQL Management Studio. All right, so you can see now I have my link to my Lake database, Dataverse TGL Stoneridge. I can click on that. I can go into tables, and I can see the tables that I have selected. And if I wanted to, I can do a quick new SQL script and select top 100 rows. It builds a standard T-SQL select statement for me, and I can run that, and it should be able to see the data out in Azure Data Lake using standard SQL syntax. There's my data. So as I mentioned earlier, you can also look at the data in SQL Management Studio. So here's an example of that. So I'm connected again to the Synapse environment, and I can see my databases just like I was able to see them in Azure Synapse Studio. I can look at my Dataverse TGL Stoneridge data and see the same tables that I saw there. I can use my standard T-SQL interface to look at the external tables that are now going to be exposed. There's my appointment, there's my account, and so on. I can do standard select, and so on. I can do selects and joins and create views. If you notice here in views, you're going to have these partition views. Again, these partitions are based on the partition option that you chose when you selected the table in the Azure Synapse configuration. And you can also use stored procedures. You can use a lot of the things. So for those of us that are more comfortable in using T-SQL and SQL Management Studio, by getting the data out into Azure Data Lake and using Synapse to tie the data into an instance of serverless SQL, we can then get the data out into this environment in a much easier format. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Christopher, who is going to talk about doing the same type of configuration, the same type of data work from finance and operations.
Thank you, Tom, for the introduction to the Synapse Link. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to Tom walked us through all the beginnings of it. So I'm going to pick up from there and talk about how we do the Azure Synapse Link for the F&O side. Okay, so just like Tom talked about, we would go into the Azure Synapse Link here within the Maker portal. And it's going to show you can have multiple links in here, but I'm going to show you quick how to do a new link off of there, and then we'll go into the same one that Tom showed us, and I'll show you, take you through that and show you how we can create a very quick Power BI report. Okay, so again, we would do a new link. Very similar to how Tom had it. The only addition here is that for F&O side, we actually have to have a Spark pool. Otherwise, the same things apply as Tom discussed. Storage account Gen 2, Synapse Link, but on our Synapse Link, we actually have to have a Spark pool, and the minimum Spark pool that we have to have is the version is a 3.3. So you'd go connect to Azure Synapse Link Workspace, choose your subscription. We would then choose our resource group, our workspace name, and then highlight use a Spark pool for Delta Lake conversion jobs. If you have that Spark pool created, it should automatically pull that in there, and it'll connect that to your storage account. Then once we hit next, it'll take us into the option. You'll see here we do have the Dataverse, so this would be the tables that Tom was talking about. But you should also see this D365 Finance and Operations. And when we click on that, there are about roughly 2,500 tables that Microsoft has pre-set up on the back end to say, hey, these are the tables that we assume you're going to do. That would be stuff like the CusTrans. If we search on it, we see customer transactions, different versions of that. So then we would come in here and we would pick the table that we want to add, just like Tom showed us. Click on Save, and it's going to go through this first time setting it up. And the reason we're going to go take a look at the setting table that we already have set up is that because this first time for the F&O side, this first time that you add that in and turn that on, it can take anywhere from an hour or two for that first session to get set up and for those fields to come over. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and let that we will let that do its thing. Well, I'm going to come back over here to Azure Synapse Link, and we're going to see that I'm going to go into the same one that Tom was talking about. And if I look at the tables, we should see all the tables that I've already set up and added to this particular Synapse Link, especially from the F&O side. And you'll see here that I have about 100 some tables that we've added in. I have my cus table, dimension tables, dir party table. Okay, and if you see active next to them, that means they're active, they're in there, and they are working. once we have it up and up and running, you can click on the Dataverse and it'll show you the Dataverse tables that are there. And in just a second here, we should see it'll pop up and give us our D365, and it'll tell me on the Dataverse side, I have 2 of 428 tables, and on the D365 side, I have 107 of the 2495 tables that are going to that'll show up over here. Okay, and as you go through, it'll show you. If you ever run into issues where for some reason it says it's not syncing, the easiest thing to do is to come out here, uncheck it, hit save, come back into it, check it, hit save again, and if that doesn't work, then there might be something different something more going on. From there, one thing I do want to tell you is that to be able to connect in Power BI, we actually need to have the serverless SQL endpoint or the dedicated SQL endpoint, depending on which one you set your Synapse up as. Ours is set up as a serverless SQL endpoint. So if you come out to your main portal, and then you go into Azure Synapse Analytics, and you find the one that you're going to be working on, okay, and go into it. Once you are in this first view, the overview, on the right-hand side here, it'll say serverless SQL endpoint. If we just copy that to the clipboard, then we open up. Then if we open up our desktop for Power BI, and we go up here to Get Data, and we go to More, and we click on Azure, we have Azure Synapse Analytics SQL, and there's two things that we need. There's the server. So the server is our SQL and is our serverless SQL endpoint, and our database is actually the database name that we can pull from within there. And so Tom showed you there's his Dataverse database, which is CE1, and then there is the one that we created when we connected to F&O. Okay, and so then we grab one of those names, one of those database names, and we use that is actually our database name. And in this instance, I'm going to do an import instead of direct query. We click on OK, and it's going to bring up and it'll show us. And so this is the database for what Tom was showing you, the CE side. I showed this one because it's the fewest tables that we'd be able to see. So you can see here we have the account table and all the other ones. So we could select the tables that we want to bring in. Now I've already done that. So you can see here I have the CUS table. This is from the F&O tables, and we have the account tables from the CE tables. Now we went in, these don't naturally have a connection between them. So we went in and modified on the CE side and added some of our customers from the customer table. And then we were able to create that join between the account num in the customer table and the account number in the on the account side, on the CE side. I linked them in here, and then I just did a very simple report that has the legend of the account number, and then I just did a sum of the credit maxes. That's one of the fields in the test data that actually has data in it showing. So you can see here, I mean, you'd need to do a lot more connection and verifying of the data before you'd be able to get some really nice visuals out of it. But we just wanted to show you a very quick visual to say, hey, with just a little bit of modification on the CE table, we were able to connect the CE to the F&O data and do a very simple visual so that you could see what they look like together. So that's how we get. That's how we add in. That's how we use the Maker portal to add in our F&O data. Tom showed the CE data. So now I'm going to pass it over to Justin, who's going to talk about the upgrading or switching from the export to data lake over to this Synapse Link for Dataverse.
Thank you, Christopher. So Christopher and Tom have shown us how simple it is to get data from CE and F&O into the Dataverse. I want to talk to you guys a minute about the deprecation of the export to data lake feature that is exclusive to F&O. Anyone still using this feature, it is important to know that as of October 15th, 2023, that this feature became deprecated. If you're using this feature currently, you have until November 1st of 2024 to continue using this feature. So what happens if you're using this feature and you're worried about the deprecation in November of this year? You have two upgrade paths. Microsoft recommends that anyone that's currently using BYOD or the export to data lake feature that you upgrade using Synapse Link for Dataverse. If you're new to your business intelligence journey, then you can look at Microsoft Fabric. Synapse Link for Dataverse is very similar to the export to data lake. Microsoft Fabric is a complete analytics platform. It covers everything from data movement to data science, real-time analytics, and business intelligence. Today, we're going to focus on Synapse Link for Dataverse. This diagram that I have up shows Synapse Link for Dataverse and export to data lake. Export to data lake is an isolated feature, and it's isolated to our F&O environment and our F&O data. Synapse, before our F&O data was allowed in Synapse Link for Dataverse, was exclusive to CE. Now we can get our F&O data in Synapse Link for Dataverse, and we can also combine that with our CE data. Our next slide shows one experience to integrate all our Dynamics data. Synapse Link for Dataverse is designed for big data analytics. It's designed as one platform that uses the common data model to store all our data across Dynamics applications. So that's F&O, CE, and other applications that we would want to bring in data to use for our reporting. Chris mentioned that our data in Synapse Link uses Apache Spark. Apache Spark is the baseline for the Delta Lake, and it leverages efficient compression and encoding schemes that are native to the format. Parquet file formats use column-wide expression. We didn't get that with CSV, which was used with our export to data lake. Parquet format is efficient and it's safe storage. All our create, updates, deletes, all our CRUD transactions are supported in Parquet. Just like the export to data lake, Synapse Link offers continuous replication of standard and custom tables in the Dataverse. Our link offers the following features. You can choose standard and custom data out of finance and operations. I just mentioned that. I just mentioned the continuous replication aspect. You can unlink or link your Synapse Analytics environments to the data lake. Chris mentioned we can have multiple Azure Synapse links out there in the Makers portal. They can be tied to the same environment. An example of that would be if you wanted to choose different frequencies where the data was updated in our Synapse Analytics workspace. And we'll look at that in a demo coming up shortly. One good feature about Azure Synapse Link compared to export to data lake is we no longer have to use the CDM util. The CDM util was used with export to data lake to get our metadata out of our storage account, or Azure Data Lake Gen 2, into our Synapse workspace. Going forward, Microsoft has took care of this for us. So when we activate a table in the Makers portal, that data will be replicated in our storage account and in our Synapse workspace without having to run an extra utility. This diagram compares some of the features between export to data lake and our Synapse Link. We talked about the tables and the replication. we didn't talk about the management of the resources. With export to data lake, we needed the CDM tail, but we also needed the key vault and some other objects in Azure to complete the process. With the Synapse Link, we have a simpler setup. We don't need the key vault. We don't need the CDM util. So the resources that we have to manage are easier. The pipeline for data is the same. We can choose almost real-time data, which should be 15 minutes after we enable that table or enable changes in that table to flow over to our storage account. The first time we enable the table, like Chris talked about, it could be longer. It depends on the workload on that environment. We talked about custom tables and we talked about getting them into Synapse Link for Dataverse. One big change between the export to data lake feature and Synapse Link is a property that we have to enable on all tables to get them to show up in the Makers portal. This property is allow row version change tracking, and this has to be set to yes. This has to be set to yes on any custom tables, any ISV tables, data entities, or base tables from Microsoft that we want to see in the Makers portal so we can get over to our setups workspace to use in our reporting. As a version 10.0.38, Microsoft has enabled 2,750 base tables. That number is different to what Chris showed us because our application version is different. In our Synapse workspace, we have the actual table and we have a partitioned version of the table. It's important to call out that the actual table, the one that doesn't have the underscore partitioned, is the near real-time data. So any changes flowing over from FNO would be in the near real-time data section. Any changes that we see in the partition would just be a snapshot. And that depends on the partition that we select in Synapse Link for Dataverse before we actually enable the table for replication. So before I get into this slide, I want to cover some more about the property change on the table. Through an extension, we can enable that change on base tables. Through customization, we can enable that change on our custom tables. In later application versions, that property is enabled by default. So it depends on how long your custom tables have been in FNO, if that property is enabled by default or not. But it is a quick change for a developer to make. When we enable that property, it also adds a field to the table called sys row version, and this field, along with the rec ID, is what Synapse Link for Dataverse uses to track changes. When we enable those tables in Synapse Link for Dataverse in the Makers portal, index creation also happens. So with export to data lake, if we needed like a rec ID index, we had to have a developer create that in Visual Studio. Going forward, Synapse Link for Dataverse can create these indexes for us. With this sys version field, along with the rec ID, indexes will be created when we enable that table in the Makers portal. The new field, the sys version change tracking field, is used to keep change tracking attributes in sync with the data that has changed since it was initially extracted. So why should we transition from export to data lake to Synapse Link for Dataverse? As I mentioned, data from all Dynamics apps is available in this simplified user interface. It's no longer isolated to FNO like export to data lake. the configuration for the Synapse Link is simpler. We don't need all the objects that we needed before with export to data lake. We now have the option to save files as Parquet, which allows us to have faster query times, smaller files, and no update conflicts that we saw with export to data lake. If we remember, the files that we had coming over from export to data lake were all CSV. We didn't have the option for Parquet back then. You could set up a firewall storage account now, where that wasn't an option with export to data lake. Materialize our FNO entities, getting our data entities out of FNO and into our Synapse workspace is a lot easier going forward. It was very painful with export to data lake. A lot of times we just had to create our own version of those entities because all the logic didn't transfer over. We might have had methods or calculations that were done in X++ or views that we had to recreate in our Synapse workspace. This process gets easier going forward with Synapse Link. Table limitations go away. Any tables that we want in our Synapse Link, we just have to make sure the property is enabled that we talked about. It's available in all regions, and we have support for memo and large string fields. That was always a problem in export to data lake. We also have translated FNO enum values. So we get the text and we get the integer. Whereas we didn't get that text going in export to data lake.